So today's webinar is going to last an hour, including Q&A and a short break. We will have closed captions available shortly. We're just setting that up. We'll do that once we get going. So if you do want to have the captions on, if you've got desktop or mobile Zoom app, you can click the CC button at the bottom. So this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it back at your leisure and share with everybody across your team and wider if you wish. There'll be additional resources as well, so they'll be available on the Digital Culture Network website. So please say hello in the chat, select everyone from the drop down so that we can all see it, and use the reaction buttons. Come and see if they're working. Give us a thumbs up or a smiley face down the bottom. Yes, I love hearts straight away. Oh, wonderful. So yeah, Andy's here for us. We're going to go to the next slide. I'm going to just show us our website. He's going to take it over in a second. Here we go. So if you've not been to our website, please go have a look. It's a wonderful one, digitalculturenetwork.org.uk. There's loads of recordings of our past webinars, there's articles, resources, all those kind of things. So loads of stuff on there. And you can get in touch with the tech champions as well. So we're here for you if you need any support with anything we talk about today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to our website's tech champion, Andy. Here he is.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me and see me. Give me a thumbs up if that is the case. All good, thank you. So I'm guessing there's going to be some latecomers. We got a bunch of people who signed up. I can see that a portion of you are there, so I'm guessing some of you are still waiting to join. So I'm going to probably make a start because we've got about 45 minutes of stuff, and then we'll have a conclusion and a Q&A. So today's webinar is around finding the best supplier for your website project. And I've constructed this in a way that hopefully there will be some salient points for arts and creative and cultural organizations of all sizes. So can you still, everybody see me? Okay.
Yeah, all good, Andy, crack on.
Okay, fine. I got somebody else log in there. I thought that I'd been disconnected. Okay, so yeah, I was just saying that hopefully there'll be some takeaways for organizations of all sizes through this webinar. The stuff in here has been pulled together from, lots of experience that I've got in this sector. I'm fairly new to the Digital Culture Network. I've been with the team since the summer. So I'm learning the ropes a little bit. So forgive me if I go kind of off tangent a little bit. But yeah, let's make a start. I should say also there's a few interactive parts to this webinar as well. So if you're tempted to drift off to check email and text messages, etc., beware, because you may not have the knowledge to be able to answer the questions. It's all very low. It's all very kind of low key. So don't worry about it too much. So I mentioned I'm new to the Digital Culture Network. This is my first, not just my first ever webinar for the Digital Culture Network. It's my first ever webinar, so anything can happen. So hang on to your hats. So to try and keep me on track, because I don't really have a script as such, I've put this into a kind of linear chapters, and they are as follows: how to plan your website project, finding suitable suppliers, so doing your research and pulling together a list, how to evaluate and vet those potential suppliers, and then also how do you move forward, what are the methods of engagement, etc. And we will conclude and have a Q&A session at the end. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and James will be kind of vetting those, and if they're suitable, I will be able to go through them towards the end of the presentation. Okay, before we kick off, I just wanted to summarize what I mean by supplier. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, a supplier is a person or organization that provides something needed, such as a product or a service. What I don't mean by supplier for the purposes of this webinar would be things like software vendors or hardware vendors. So MailChimp, WordPress, Shopify, etc. Those aren't suppliers. The supplier is the organization or the freelancer that we're going to be kind of using to move forward with. So in terms of terminology, if any of you got experience of commissioning website projects in the past, there are a whole range of labels and names for what suppliers could be. So when I say supplier today, what I'm talking about is anybody from a freelancer or a contractor all the way through to a full service agency. So it's quite a broad breadth of supply that we're talking about. So I'm going to be using supplier as that term. So step one, how to plan your website project. So I'm kind of aware that this is very much a webinar in itself, this topic, and I'm not going to go into this in lots of detail. We're just going to cover some of the kind of rudiments of it. If you are planning a website project, obviously you can come and talk to us at the Digital Culture Network, and we can help and advise you through the process. As you know, we're a free and impartial body for doing so. So what do we do in terms of that process? So in summary, we're going to look at defining the objectives. We're going to look at budgets and timescales. We're going to get agreement, achieving a consensus of everybody involved, and we're going to look to prepare a brief. So I'm going to cover each of those in turn. So this is the starting point, not just for a website project, but pretty much of any project. Why are we doing this? What are the primary objectives? What are the ambitions of the project? What's its purpose? It might be, you know, if you're a venue, it might be to sell more tickets. It's purely about getting bums on seats. It might be that you want to raise your organization's profile, maybe locally, regionally, or perhaps even internationally. If you're a large organization, it may be a case of raising funds, or perhaps your organization has gone through some kind of restructuring. You've revisited your mission, your values. You've perhaps had a visual overhaul in terms of a brand process. So the website needs to dovetail with all of that. It needs to kind of be in sync. So there are a number of objectives that may be specific to you, but capturing those and being clear about them going forward is really, really important. It's the first kind of step on the journey. It's really, really vital to get stakeholder agreement. What I mean by that is getting everybody on board, everybody within the organization. They're all on the same page. They all understand why we're about to embark on this journey. Why is it that we're going to be redesigning our website? That could be from the business owner, the CEO, the board, through trustees and patrons if you have them, all the way through all departments and staff. So everybody has some kind of ownership. Everybody's aware that the project's happening, and invite them to input on it. You know, it's really important that there's a sense of ownership to it. In advance, I'd probably recommend that in addition, you canvass the opinions and views of your customers or your audience. You can do that through running a survey, perhaps on the website, asking some really simple questions. You know, what do you like about the website? What don't you like? What would you like to see on a revised website? All of that kind of stuff is good information that you're getting. If you run a subscriber list, for example, you might want to have a feature on that around, you know, we're redeveloping the website, you know, let us know your thoughts. So there's an involvement, not just of the internal staff, but also the audiences. I think that's pretty crucial also. So once we've got the objectives nailed and everybody's in agreement, we need to think, well, what can we afford to deliver this? How much can we afford to commit to this project? Also have a think about when it needs to be launched by. Is there a particular milestone in the future that it'd be nice to get a new website live for if you're attending an event, for example? Really important also, what support are you going to need post-launch? What's the relationship with the supplier going to be like afterwards? And we'll come back to that a little bit later in this presentation. The other consideration is, what internal resources do we have? So rather than commissioning the agency to do work that perhaps could be done internally, have a think about internal resources around things like content, even perhaps some design work. So I worked on a case recently for an organization, and they were fortunate enough to have a graphic designer as a kind of a volunteer. So he was doing lots of kind of low-level kind of design work for them that they didn't need to place with the agency. So there's a cost saving there. So have a think about internal resources for the project in addition. All of that consolidates into a project brief. That is a document or a specification which aggregates all of this thinking. So you've got your objectives written down. Obviously, we're going to be looking to pull back some costs from the suppliers that we shortlist. So we need to go into a degree of detail around some of the specifics for the project. That could be, I don't know, it could be integrations, for example. So if you're a venue and you've got box office integration requirements, then obviously that's something that needs to be documented. Maybe you've got a membership area on the website, or there's an advanced search feature that you need to include. All of that needs to be earmarked within the brief. In addition, design, something I'm pretty passionate about because my background is actually as a creative. It's always nice to give the supplier some kind of starter for 10 really about what you're benchmarking against. So whatever type of organization you are, have a look at other organizations that you perhaps admire and maybe list down some of the web addresses of their websites and just have that as a talking point to kick off that whole process of pulling a creative brief together. So yeah, design preferences are an important consideration. Budget and timescales. I'm of the view that it's always best to be transparent about budget, publish it with the brief. It saves you and the agencies a lot of time. And also maybe as an appendices, include any research or data that you might have. So by research, that might be any insights that you've gathered in the past, any market research that you've done. It's possible if you've got multiple audiences that, you may have persona types for those types of audiences. That's all great content, great information to provide to a supplier as they're starting to get to grips with who you are and what you do. Data could include things like web statistics as well. So if you're running analytics, you might want to put some reporting in around that, which might be beneficial also. So chapter 1 of the webinar has been about planning the website project. As I say, we could talk about this for much, much longer. There are, as I say, resources on our Knowledge Hub on our website where you can go into this in a bit more detail. But in summary, those are the 4 steps that you'd need to go through. So we've got our first little interactive interlude, as I'm calling it. And that is just to give some sense of what your anticipated budget might be. So you may or may not be planning a website project in the short term, but if you imagine that you were doing maybe for 2023, whereabouts do you think you would pitch your budget approximately? Would it be A, less than £5,000? Would it be B, £5,000 to £20,000? C, £20,000 to £50,000? Or D, more than £50,000? So if you want to use the chat just to pop in A, B, C, or D on there, I'll give you a moment while I take a slug of squash. Just gives a sense of who we've got in the audience today. Okay. Some of you I can see are being a bit shy and cagey about this. That's fine, don't worry. Okay, so that just gives me a sense. Most of you kind of in the A to C range, from what I can see thus far. A couple of no ideas, that's absolutely fine. Hopefully that'll become a bit clearer as we go forward. Right, chapter 2. So we've got a brief, we've got a clear consensus from everybody. What do we do about finding the ideal supplier for our project? Where do we go to? What's the process? I'm going to kick off with a statistic. There are something like 1,900 web design companies in the UK. This is according to a report that was done by IBISWorld back in March. Now, that doesn't include digital agencies or full service agencies or freelancers or many of those other types of suppliers that we saw earlier in the presentation on that kind of word cloud. So there's lots and lots of talent out there. Where on earth do you start to find the perfect supplier for your project? Well, I'm going to kick off with a little bit of geography. I'm kind of the view that a webinar isn't really entirely satisfactory unless it has some kind of map in it. So I've been slightly indulgent. I've included a map. So this is a broad brush strokes, really. This isn't showing you and pinpointing where your perfect supplier is. What it's doing is giving some indication of where creative clusters are aggregated within the UK. I'm just going to rattle through this fairly quickly. So the map on the left was an older study done by Nesta, which established there were 47 what it deemed to be creative regions or creative areas throughout the United Kingdom. And on the back of that, a more recent study that was undertaken by the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, PEC, identified what are called kind of creative clusters. And this is the map on the right, which is quite interesting because it becomes a lot more spread out. So you might be an organisation in a rural area, and you might think, well, I'm going to have to go to my nearest city or town to find the supplier that I need. That's not actually the case. So in purple, those are all the creative clusters that have been identified within those 47 core creative areas. Interestingly, the points in red are to do with creative clusters that exist outside those areas. So you can see it's much more spread out. And I guess a lot of that is to do with, more remote working, for example. So by no means is this an exact science, but it just gives some kind of indicative indication about where the creative community are located. And I think James has got a map he's going to pop in the chat there, so you can peruse this at your leisure. Don't worry about doing that at this moment because this presentation will be made available to you. But if you want to copy and paste that link, you can have a look at this later. So, geography aside, what do we do to find those potential suppliers? Well, we've identified 3 core activities that you can undertake. One is recommendations and outreach. Second is research. And the third is ourselves, the Digital Culture Network. So I'm going to cover each of those in turn. So a colleague of mine raised the point very, very correctly when I had a run through of this earlier in the week about what about if you've got an existing supplier. So I just wanted to just touch on that for a moment. So it might well be that you're very happy with your existing supplier, whoever it is that looks after your website. You might feel that you're getting good service. You might feel that the quality of the work is high, that they're responsive, etc. And that's great. But on occasion, there's no harm in benchmarking that. So if you're about to embark on a new website project, I think out of courtesy, if you have got a good relationship with your existing supplier, you probably need to involve them in that process, unless there's a good reason for not doing so. If you've got a supplier that perhaps isn't responsive, or you have question marks over their abilities or the quality of the work, then perhaps you're going to exclude them from the process. But yeah, just wanted to cover off that many of you may already have an existing supplier who you're happy with. So that some of them may be on this call, so I guess I need to be careful what I say. Okay, let's work through each of these in turn, kicking off with recommendations. So who designed your website? So this is a really, really simple first step that you can take. You can ask colleagues and peers within the sector, who designed your website? Was it a good experience? How much did it cost? Do they look after you going forward? So it's really great that you can getting recommendations and referrals from people that you know and you trust. So that's a really kind of a great starter for 10 in terms of finding your ideal supplier. If you're going around to conferences and networking events, then again, have a chat with people, quiz them about their website, ask them who they use, whether they've got, a track record in this sector potentially, and just really mine your network, because I think that's a great way of getting an initial set of recommendations. I mean, at this point, we're not really shortlisting. At this point, we're just pulling together a number of potential suppliers. So you might want to just jot that down on an A4 piece of paper, or you might want to just spin up a spreadsheet and just copy and paste a number of suppliers into that. So this is the starting point in the process. If you're really struggling, you can ask colleagues and friends, maybe people who are in business who have had a good website experience. Just ask them who did it, and you can do a little bit of vetting to find out if you want to take that conversation forward. So beyond recommendations, you can also use outreach. So social media is a good way of doing this, particularly for business. I think LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the best avenues to reach out through your network and through your followers. You could use Facebook and Instagram in addition, if those were channels that are close to your heart. I found an example here actually on LinkedIn. This is from Liz McGrath. So she's posted a message up to the network saying, I'm looking for a freelance web designer to build a simple WordPress website. If anyone in my network has availability over the next few months or can recommend anyone who might, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Hashtag web design. Hashtag WordPress. So Liz has reached out and fairly rapidly updated this post with, that got more responses than I expected. Thanks to everyone who has commented or sent a direct message. I'll be in touch. So Liz has reached out to her network on LinkedIn. She's got a number of recommendations through. You can see there's 100 comments here. So there's a lot of potential suppliers for her to draw through, but it's a great starting point. And, you know, this is one of the tactics that you can use to potentially find that elusive perfect supplier. Similarly, you could look to use Twitter, and I've seen a lot of people doing this. So this is a person who said, can anyone recommend a good web designer? And fairly rapidly has put, hey guys, I'm not ghosting you, but this response has been huge. Give me a minute to go through those amazing DMs being direct messages, and then showing exceptional protocol and etiquette for social media. She's posted, thanks to everyone who's responded. I've narrowed it down to a few candidates, and if you're one of them, I'll be in touch. So again, it's another tool in your arsenal to reach out and find those potential suppliers. So that's recommendations and outreach. What about research? Well, Google's a great place to start, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate. There are various ways that you can search. You can do so by location. You can search by sector. You can search using specific terms. So let's take a look at those each in order. So I'm based in Leicester in the East Midlands. And if I was looking for a local web designer for my project, I could just type in web designer Leicester, and that would pull back a number of results based on that search. Now, this isn't necessarily Google saying these are the 10 best web designers in Leicester, but it is matching my key phrase as accurately as it can using its algorithm to agencies or to suppliers who meet that keyword criteria. I could be a bit more exact, and I could say, well, you know, I want a supplier who works in our sector, so web designer, culture and arts, and that will filter those results down accordingly. So this is a little bit more exact. Going one step further, you could be even more surgical. Let's say I was a dance company looking to redevelop my website. I could pop into a Google search, web designer, dance company, and that would pull back a number of suppliers who make the claim that they are specialists in designing for dance organizations. So obviously you need to click the links, you need to do your own evaluation, you need to sanity check if those suppliers are if their claims are correct. But again, it's another way that you can go out and try and find that perfect supplier. So another thing that you can do, which is nice and simple, is you can look at other organizations that perhaps you aspire to or that you admire, and you can scroll down to the footer. So that's the area right at the bottom of their website where usually there's all the small print, and you know there's logos and stuff like that. But if you hunt around through the footer, you might well find a discrete credit for the organization, or rather for the supplier who's created that website. So here's 3 examples. You can click on those links. It'll take you to the website of that supplier, and then you can do a little bit of evaluation and decide if you want to perhaps consider them for your project. So that's another technique that you can employ. There's also things called online directories. Now, there are loads of these, and I've just included a couple here. So this is Clutch, and what I've done here is I have typed in digital agencies in the United Kingdom. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but there are some filters there. I've filtered my search by a client budget of less than $10,000. And I've also selected an industry, which is arts, entertainment, and music. In so doing, it's reduced the number of agencies to 24. So again, you could go through that list of 24. You could have a look at their work and deduce whether you feel they are a good fit for your project. Bear in mind, Clutch is not necessarily a directory of quality. The organizations who within this directory have paid for placement as part of their marketing. So yeah, it's just another avenue for you to consider. This makes me slightly, I don't know, slightly nervous putting this slide in somehow. I don't know why. Fiverr is not a service that I have used. I've never commissioned any work in my agency passed through Fiverr, and I've heard good things and I've heard bad things. So if you do have a really modest budget, this might be something that you would consider. It might be a route you consider going down in the absence of any recommendations, etc. So it's basically a directory of suppliers who are tagged by various specialties. So website development, website design, etc., WordPress design. So it is another opportunity for you to do some evaluation. I'm just peeping into the webinar chat there. I probably shouldn't do this, but somebody's asked, what do I mean by sanity check? That just means to evaluate, to double check something. Apologies for that piece of jargon. Moving forward then, there are also directories of freelancers. So rather than a company, you're looking at an individual who may potentially help you bring your project to life. And again, they will be individuals who are located all over the world. They will publish their work. They will publish a biog about themselves and also their hourly rate. So that gives you some feel and to see if it'll fit your budget. The Arts Marketing Association also have a kind of a vetted list of freelancers with a track record in the arts and culture sector. That might be another directory for you to look at. So I think James is going to post the link in the chat there. You can filter by various specialisms beyond websites. So if you're looking for help for search engine optimization or social media management, other services, that might be another good port of call for you as part of this process. So finding suppliers, we've looked at recommendations, we've looked at outreach, we've looked at social media and online directories to try and unearth these people who can help us. If you're really struggling, you can come to the Digital Culture Network. We have a evolving list of suppliers, which we use to not necessarily recommend, but for organizations who are really struggling to find somebody to help them with their website project, we can signpost them to suppliers who might be a good fit for them. So by all means, come to us, but we should point out you do really need to do your own vetting. So open communications with them, speak to them, meet them, and see if you think they're a good fit for you or not. Okay, that nearly concludes the second part of the webinar. I'm just glancing at the time, 2:30, broadly on track, so that's a relief to everyone. I'm going to ask you now to fingers on buzzers. This is the second interactive little insert, if you like. Based on what we've talked about, or using your own experience, what would you do to find a supplier? What would be your first activity? Would it be A, recommendations via colleagues and peers within your network or within your sector? Would it be B, outreach through social media channels? Would it be C, research using Google and online directories? Or would it be D, coming directly to the Digital Culture Network? I'll give you a moment, take another sip of squash. A and D, I like that. So a mix, which is what you'd expect. I think, if time allows and you have the resource, next time you're looking to redevelop your website, I think all of these activities would be recommended. Great, thanks for everybody for contributing to that. We're going to move to step 3, which is vetting those potential suppliers. So to recap, we've done our website planning, we've got our brief, we've got stakeholder engagement, we've done some research, we've pulled together potentially a long list of potential suppliers. How do we go about evaluating them? How do we siphon out the wheat from the chaff, as it were? How do we get that short list of 3 or 4 who we're going to invite to submit that brief to? So there are a number of ways that we can critique or evaluate the suppliers who we're looking to work with. Now, I've ordered these in a list, but it's not in any particular order, because depending on which organization you are, these might differ, and you might put higher weightings on some than others. But in summary, and I'm going to rattle through these pretty quickly, we've got relevant sector experience. We've got commercial alignment. That means making sure that your budget fits the budget which the supplier would deem to be commercially viable. We would look at other related services, the all-important cultural fit. Do we like them? Can we work with them? An environmental commitment, award-winning, and trusting your instinct. So I'm going to walk through those one by one. So do they have the relevant sector experience? So how do we know, when we're looking at the websites of a potential supplier, how do we know whether they have the relevant sector experience? Well, there are clues. So if we were to look at the homepage of a potential supplier, we're going to find statements, their kind of elevator pitch, if you like, of what it is that they do. And here are 4 examples that I've screen grabbed. They'll probably hate me for saying this, but they're all effectively saying the same thing, in that they work with cultural organizations, they work in the arts in partnership, and yeah, they're basically setting out their stall. So for organizations like yourselves, they're positioning themselves as, yeah, we do this kind of day in, day out. Many of these suppliers will demonstrate their skill set and who they've worked with in the sector. So here, for example, you've got an organization who have worked with the Royal Albert Hall and the New York Ballet. So a very impressive track record of large cultural organizations. So if you were a very modest organization of maybe 3 or 4 people and you've got a very small budget, this may not be the supplier for you, because the fit isn't really there. That's not, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's pointing in that direction. It might well be that these suppliers will just publish a list of people who they've worked with. So it's always a good idea to review that list and see if it resonates with, the kind of organization that you are. This supplier here, you can see, have got bags of experience working with museums. So if you're a museum, you might think these guys are a safe pair of hands. They're going to understand our challenges and our pain points. They may be a good supplier to shortlist. In addition to that, have a look at their work. Most suppliers will have a case study section or a portfolio section. So have a look at their work, judge it in terms of, from a design point of view, creatively, how does it look? Also look for results. I think that's really important. So if they're making claims around uplifts in, ticket sales and increased subscribers and more online donations, etc., that's all kind of positive stuff to look out for. In addition, there may be testimonials from the clients or from perhaps the customers themselves, talking positively about the experience or the outcome of the project. So this is all good, positive stuff that you want to take on board when you're pulling together that all important shortlist. So the third interactive interlude is coming up. I'm going to ask you very simply, A or B, which of these suppliers would you say has the arts experience and are most likely to make your shortlist? Is it A or is it B? I'll just give you a moment. Most of you are putting A, which is something of a relief, because the list for B is mainly blue chip and not really our bag at all. So well done, and thanks for taking part, those of you who have done so. Just conscious of time, so I'm gonna crack on. So this chapter, as I've said, is all about evaluating suppliers and looking at which one might be the most suitable for your project. There are various ways you can do that. Budget is one of the biggies, and I think one of probably the first questions you need to ask yourself is, well, can we afford to hire a team, an agency, or does our budget is it most appropriate to working with a freelancer or a contractor? Now, with a freelancer, this is an individual. They're probably not going to have very high overheads. They may be working from home. So the main benefit, the main advantage of commissioning a freelancer is one around cost. Their costs are going to be pretty low. The downside of that is if they're really busy with other clients, or they're on holiday, or they're not well, then there's may potentially be a communications issue. There's a single point of failure. So obviously with an agency where you're working with a team, you're likely to have more than one point of contact. You'll probably have a project manager, and you might have direct access to, one of the studio staff or one of the developers potentially. So you've got the benefit there of having a team of experts, a skilled team, but obviously that comes with a cost. So yeah, something to think about, matching your budget to the kind of supplier that most befits your project. Now, I've put a slightly contentious slide together, and this is an attempt to find a sweet spot between a budget and the potential kind of scale of supplier. So I've pulled this together based on my own experience of running my own agency, and also the many conversations I've had with organizations and suppliers, both freelancers and agencies, while I've been working with the Digital Culture Network and the Arts Council. So I'll rattle through this pretty quickly. So on the left, you've got a chart of 0 to 100,000. And then along the bottom, you've got 6 different types of potential supplier. From the left to the right, then you've got internal staff, and there have been instances when I've spoken to organisations where they've literally got no budget, and they've had to work with volunteers and supporters and internal staff to deliver projects, and that's totally valid. You've got freelancers, and as a broad rule of thumb, the more experience they have, the more expensive they're going to be. You've got agencies of small size, like 1 to 5, 5 to 25, and then agencies of 25 plus. And when I say 25, I mean people within the organization. There aren't many instances that I've come across whereby agencies of more than 25 people have worked on projects in this sector, but I'm sure I'm wrong on that. I just haven't come across them yet. The area in grey you can see is a very broad hourly rate for ongoing work that you might want to do with this supplier. So this is a very broad brush rule of thumb, but hopefully for those of you who have never embarked on a project such as this, and I've noticed in the chat some of you haven't got a clue about your budget, hopefully this gives you some kind of barometer to work against. So budget, that's another big consideration. It might be that you're looking for a supplier who has services beyond just delivering your website for you. So it might be that you need help with email marketing or social media management or advertising and pay-per-click, etc. So when you're looking on the websites of these potential suppliers, have a look at their services and see whether they do more than just website design and build. And that might be a factor in the decision-making process for you. Okay. So we've talked about budget, we've talked about geography, we've talked about services. What we haven't spoken about yet, and what's really important, is cultural fit. And by that, I mean developing a partnership with a supplier which is strong and which really works. We want it to be an enjoyable experience delivering this project. So we need to be able to source, a shortlist of people who fit that sweet spot, really. So here you can see in this screen grab, there's a story that's being told about a project. This is for the Belgrade Theatre, and you can see there's lots of nice imagery here of workshops and client and supplier, eating croissants and drinking coffee around tables, and it's all very, very cozy and very nice. So have a look through the blog of your supplier websites, have a look through their social outputs, get a sense of who they are, look at their tone of voice. I think you need to use your instinct here about the look of the agency, and make sure that it fits with, you know, the broad ethos and values of your own organization. And if we can find a match there, then, you know, I think that's a big consideration for you. A lot of these supplier websites will also have team pages. Infrequently they have mugshots, and usually there's an agency dog in there somewhere. If you're funded by the Arts Council, you'll know that in the Let's Create strategy, diversity is one of the central tenets of that. If you're an organization for whom diversity is a really, really key part, and you know you like to engage with suppliers who reflect your own breadth of diversity, then you know that's something you might want to consider as part of your decision-making process. The other thing within the Let's Create strategy, which all the organization that I speak to are really, really keen on, and that is sustainability. So in order to get your funding, I believe you have to show evidence of having strong environmental policies. And part of that is also for the people that you commission to undertake work for you. So your own suppliers, do they adhere to the same, the same environmental principles and ethics? So that might be something that, you know, is a factor in your decision making also. And if you have a look around a lot of these potential supplier websites, you should be able to find some evidence of, you know, reduction of carbon footprint, etc. So do have a look around and see what you can find. Some agencies put a lot of effort into becoming award winning. It takes a lot of effort and late nights in many instances. If you feel that having a supplier who is award winning is important to you, or they've won awards in an area that resonates with you, then again, that's something to look for, and it's something for you to factor in. As well as awards, you might want to think about something else that's really important for that supplier, and that is, how do they treat their own staff? So the organization that you want to commit to working alongside you on your project, how do they treat their own staff? It's quite an important question to ask. And again, by having a look through their website, doing your due diligence, you should be able to find evidence of whether it's a great place to work, etc. So yeah, that's an important thing also. Right. So the final interactive interlude, hopefully most of you are still with me at this point. This is going to be the conclusion of the third part. Before we go into the final section, which portfolio resonates most? If you could just jump onto your chat and let me know, A or B, which of these agencies or which of these suppliers would you be most likely to invite to shortlist? Would it be A or B? Come on, don't be shy. Most of you got A, which is spot on. Fantastic. Right. So another very, very quick recap. Website's brief has been sorted. We've done our due diligence around finding a long list of suppliers. We've then vetted them in a bit more detail to pull together that magic shortlist of 3 or 4 suppliers who are absolutely spot on for our project. We've looked at budget, we've looked at geography, we've looked at cultural fit, we've done all of that stuff, and we're feeling really confident. How do we move forward? What are the methods of engagement, as we call it? So the thing to do is to reach out to the shortlist and firstly ask them if they are interested in this project. Gauge their interest. You need to be transparent about the budget, because if the budget is beyond what they would consider to be, you know, commercially viable for them, then obviously there's no point including them in the process. So be kind of honest and upfront with them, tell them about the project in summary. And then what I'd recommend you do is arrange to meet them, ideally at their premises, so you can go around and see them, have a look at their studio or, you know, their setup, see if it resonates with the website that you've already looked at. Speak to them about the project, find out about their work, find out a bit more about them, maybe get them to present 2 or 3 of their case studies. Ask them about post-launch support. Ask them what what the relationship is like going forward. How do they like to work with suppliers going forward? Once you've done that, once you've seen the white of their eyes and you think, yeah, I'm really happy with this short list of suppliers, we can then go about inviting those suppliers to quote for the work. There are three main ways to do this. So if you're a library or a museum, and if you're receiving funding from your local authority, for example, they may require you to go through an ITT, an invitation to tender. That is a process whereby a set of forms sent out to the suppliers that you've identified. They fill in those forms, they're submitted back. There's a kind of a scoring matrix based on what they've put, and then the leading supplier is appointed with the role. So that's one way it could work. For a larger project, and by larger, I'm saying finger in the air above £25,000, you might request a pitch presentation whereby the suppliers present their credentials to you, their initial thoughts on the project, how they would work with you, any challenges that they identify, maybe even some speculative initial visuals of how they see the project going forward. So that would be a pitch presentation scenario. Based on most of the casework that I've done thus far, the vast majority of organisations tend to circulate their brief and they request a proposal and costs. So that is for anything I would say under 25k, that would probably be the route that you would go down. Just a note to say, for very large projects, an agency will typically take you on what's called a discovery process, and that is an earmarked piece of work which they would on occasion charge for in addition, whereby they have workshops with all the stakeholders and really challenge the brief and really get to know you as an organization. So that's the other thing that might happen. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to rattle through these final slides. So the post-launch relationship is really important. Don't see the project as ending at the point of launch. Make sure that there's discussions around who's going to look after the website post-launch, and make sure that you put some budget aside for this. That's really important. Get an agreement formalized with the supplier, so there's a clear understanding about what you're doing on the website post-launch and what they're doing from a maintenance standpoint. And try and make sure that you're seen as working in partnership with them. Keep them involved. Let them know if there's change in the organization, because the best suppliers will be the ones that come back with proactive ideas about how you can improve not just your website, but your digital footprint and your marketing more generally. A few things to look out for. These are kind of like red flags. Be mindful of suppliers who say we have our own software, in particular if that's a content management system. And for those who aren't familiar, a content management system is purely the means by which you can log in and make changes to your website. If you're using a proprietary system that's been designed by a supplier, you're kind of tied in to using that system going forward. It's not very portable. There's licensing issues, etc. So if anything were to happen to the relationship with that supplier, or if they were to stop trading, for example, you'd be slightly stuck with a software that's no longer being supported. So be mindful of that. Also be conscious of costs that come back that are too good to be true. There's usually a reason for that. That would be a bit of a red flag for me. And also be mindful of suppliers who you have to chase up. So, if they're not replying to your emails, or they've not got back to you when they've promised they would do, that suggests to me that perhaps you're low down their list of priorities, and, they're not dying to work with you. And if that's the case, I would maybe discount them from the process. And maybe roll back to your previous list and add in another supplier to make up your shortlist. So there's a few things to look out for. So at the end of the process, it's decision time. Has the supplier who you're considering appointing, have they met all the criteria you've identified? Can they meet your budget and your timescales? Have they got a proven track record in your sector that they can demonstrate? Do they offer all the services that you need long term? Use your instinct also. Are they the right cultural fit? When you met them, did they feel like people that you could work with going forward? That's really important. And if you're still not sure, as I say, you've got the digital culture network to use. We will happily provide an opinion. We won't necessarily select for you, but we can give you some expertise, some experience to help you make that final decision. So just before we wrap up with the Q&A, in conclusion, the main takeaways. Plan your project and publish your budget. Do please invest time researching potential suppliers. I've been on numerous calls with suppliers where the relationship is broken down. In most cases, it's because the wrong supplier has been commissioned to work with that organization. So do invest in some time up front on this. Also, make sure that you earmark some time for vetting and shortlisting the suppliers against many of the criteria that I spoke about in part 3 of this webinar. And as I say, discuss with them and be transparent about what the post-launch support and partnership arrangement will look like. A final thought, as with any product or service that you buy, you generally get what you pay for. So at that point, I'm going to take a break for a moment, and we're going to have the Q&A. So James, there he is.
Hello. Well done. I love that graph. That was really nice.
Oh, did you?
Like from my data analytics point of view, it was a very nice use of the right graph for the right purpose. That was excellent.
Thank you.
We've got lots of questions. You'll be happy to hear. So,
oh, great. Okay, well, I'll do my best.
You do your best. So yeah, I'm just going to go through some of these that we've got. So first up, we've got one from Rachel Wood from Really Curious. And this is about an internal team which have lots of skills.
Yeah.
And they're really keen to develop a website themselves, but they don't really have much time and they have other priorities. So it's usually on the back burner. It's going to be very difficult for that to get done. So the question is, if Rachel was to outsource the project, how, it's like a sensitive issue internally because of what we talked about then. Are there any tips that you've got for that?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think the challenge you have there is very common. It's a tricky one. It's a sensitive one. I think the key thing is to ensure that internally people retain ownership, so they're included in all steps of the process, from doing the research to writing the brief to maybe commissioning the agency to evaluating the creative work, all of that stuff. Put a steering group together maybe that have ownership of that project and just make them feel included. I mean, right at the start, I was talking about, if you do have internal resource, you can save some costs by doing it yourself. The challenge is always there's the day job. And, unfortunately, the website does often end up on the back burner. But, if you do have an internal resource, maybe a designer or a writer, then, I think try to keep them involved and see if you can earmark at least for them to have some involvement, I would say.
Yeah, and it's a learning journey for them, isn't it? To see
absolutely.
Any gaps in knowledge, they're going to learn through the whole process as well. We had a question from Grim & Co. This is, are we aware of any organisations that help to provide funding to do a rebrand and ensure a really accessible website?
Sorry, say that again, James. I didn't quite catch that.
Are there any funds that you're aware of, any funds or grants that would help an organisation towards a rebrand or with an accessible website?
Beyond the funding that comes from the Arts Council directly, and I know there's lottery funding alongside that, I confess I don't know masses around the funding. As I explained at the start, I'm still fairly new to the role in terms of that, but I don't know, James, you've probably got a better idea given that you're so well established within the DCN.
Yeah. There are different funds. I don't know if there are any specifically for rebranding and accessibility, but we can have a look at the list we've got. I think there's 9 tech champions within our team. So I think, James, if we can make a note of that and make a note of who asked the question, I'm sure we can do a bit of digging around and probably find something for you. But putting me on the spot, sorry, I'm going to have to blank on that one. That's fine. Beverly replied and says that she can't comment on funding, but can recommend embed for digital accessibility audits. They've been really good through that process. So
okay,
good recommendation there. So another thing for us to check out. Sanjay asks, and this goes between you and me and our different specialisms really, and it's the role of using data to help inform and validate a project and the direction of purpose that it'll go on. Yes, what 5 ways are there to included into a brief, and do the potential suppliers help with that? Like using the data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, it's all part of the process, really. I think, at the start of the presentation, when I was talking about the planning section, I did say that you could put an appendices together of data that you'd collected. But in addition to that, if you're working with an agency, I would say, their skill set would probably include the research, and they might do qualitative and quantitative research. They could probably help you to develop persona types, etc. And really, deep dive into the data. It's a really good question, and I think, again, it's all kind of comes down to the budget, really. If you can afford an agency to do a lot of that kind of groundwork for you, if you haven't done it yourselves, then that would be a perfect fit, really. Yeah,
that's right. And there's tools, you mentioned Google Analytics there, but there's things like Hotjar or Microsoft Clarity as well, that will do additional. Will give you additional data about the use of the website, your current website as well. So that might inform the project as well. So
yeah, I think the question is probably less about the data in terms of usage. I think, well, I'm guessing, was it Sanjay? I think it's probably more about data around audiences and what they're looking for, and the best projects are the ones where the audiences have been defined and you understand their pain points, and you're creating a product or a website which meets those pain points. I'm guessing that's what the question is about.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and we have some brief templates, and that's something that we help with as well. So Sanjay, if you go into that project process, get in touch, and he'll help you. Just sending that to him. So I've got another question. This one's from Beverly at Heritage Trust Network, and this is all about any tips for embarking on a website project where the website needs to link into Salesforce-based CRM system.
Yeah, I think, for a project like that, you need to vet really carefully. You need to find a supplier who has, a track record, not just in creating, fantastic websites, but also can integrate CRM systems. And if it's Salesforce, then they need to demonstrate that pedigree. I mean, one of the things I didn't mention in this webinar, and perhaps I should have done with retrospect, is taking references. So particularly for your project, if you're integrating Salesforce, I imagine it's a fairly large scale project. So you probably need to take references from the suppliers that you've probably shortlisted.
Yeah, and it's mapping out what is the data that you need to collect as well, isn't it? What integration needs to happen at each stage. We've been working with various organizations doing like similar CRM systems, and theirs was about what data is going in at what point, so what forms need to be filled out. And you mentioned here that you're doing memberships and training events. So does it have to be a full integration, or does it need to be, like what level of integration does it need to be as part of that brief, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I've got another question from Maria. So this one is about how typical is it for suppliers to set up a web platform that enables a semi-automated update of stories and images from third parties, which are subject to simple check before going live? Are there companies who run strong and simple CRM systems from a web platform which enable tailored communication to different segments? Oof, that's a long one, isn't it?
No, that was a long one. I lost the start of that. Was that to do?
Sorry.
Was that against CRM integration? Was it?
I think it's allowing third parties to upload content into a website platform, and then that to be reviewed before going live, I think.
Oh, like a vetting process.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah, I think, instances where we've done that previously, like things like message boards and stuff like that, you can have the immediacy of publishing stuff directly, but obviously, you run foul of people kind of abusing that. So you need to put a mechanism in place which would vet that third-party content or that user-generated content. So yeah, it's a balance of immediacy versus kind of overhead and time, I guess. I'm not sure I've answered that question, but
yeah, it's get in touch, Maria, because then we can talk through that.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody's got any questions above and beyond, just conscious of time, we're here, I wouldn't say 24/7, but we're here kind of 5 days a week to deal with all this sort of stuff. So by all means, drop us a line if you've got any questions from anything that's come off today's webinar.
We had one last question, which was around dual languages on a website, but I think that's something that would be partly with the agency you work with and doing multi-language sites.
Yeah.
But again, get in touch and we can talk through that if you need extra help. That's it for us, isn't it? I think that's all done. Thank you.
I think so. I think the slide to conclude with is just the get in touch slide.
Lovely. Look
Right,
at
James.
that.
So yeah, this is you've probably already covered this off at the start, haven't you? But yeah, if you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. We work with organisations of all sizes across all different art forms. So do get in touch if you've got any queries around anything digital, because we've got a great team here. It's not just about websites, it's also about all kinds of digital stuff. So yeah, also follow us on Twitter. We're also now on LinkedIn. Better late than never. So yeah, do follow us. And if you've got any questions or any queries, then obviously we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching.